So I think the reason why me and you are here on this earth right now is because our ancestors were so good at sharing information. And I think language was invented so we could learn from each other. And this is probably the best way to learn from each other, right? It's the best way to communicate because all that we had before was nonverbal things. But now we have a very robust language. And we've even learned that babies cry in different languages. Yeah, I know that sounds weird, but like a German baby, I guess, cries differently than a Chinese baby. Probably so that they can be understood better by their mothers and fathers, so that they could be more attended to. Now, the easiest way to learn a language is by vocab, is to just learn chunks of a particular language. So, words, for instance. This was kind of how I learned a little bit of Japanese. Now I don't really know shit as far as like my vocab, but I think I learned around like 400 words or something. Now it's probably like 100 or some shit. But Rosetta Stone is actually a good language tool, which basically just thrusts you into learning the language. And so you learn by chunks and you learn by vocab, and you also learn the written language quite fast. But my point is that I think there is too much information when it comes to League of Legends, or rather even the pro scene in particular. And the fact that if you ever hear any of the comms in North America, you know, whenever you hear like a replay of like a mic check back in the day before when Riot used to do it, was that you would hear just a constant blabbering of just useless shit and people calling out targets over and over and over and over and over again. And it became so redundant. It still is fucking redundant. And it's just useless chatter. And sometimes you could even hear some players calling out something, but it gets drowned out by everyone else, you know, shouting about a target or something like that. And so this is what I'm talking about with useless information. And I feel like we're in a weird era, just like in general, like, you know, if we're gonna expand this shit to like the universe type idea, but we're like in this weird era in humankind to where we have too much information. So over in Counter-Strike, it's been said a lot, in fact, that North American teams, they chatter a lot on the comms, and their comms are very muddled. There's multiple people calling at the same time, and it just seems like they all can't get on the same page. Versus in European teams, it's more structured. There's more like a consistent shot caller, and it just seems like the entire team is on the same page. You could probably make some similar parallels to League of Legends. But I had once given some advice. This was to Ashley Kang, actually, back in the day. I don't know if the podcast still exists on the internet, but we did a podcast together, and I think that was with Darius as well at the Shot Caller. But I gave her advice saying that essentially podcasts work in a different way, or rather, your voice in a microphone works in a different way, because when you're speaking with people, just, you know, out in public or in a room, etc., your voice travels differently, and the volume effect is far more different, to where multiple people can speak at the same time and it doesn't sound very muddled. Versus when you're in a podcast, you can't try and talk, or you can't try and say little murmurings at the same time, because that affects the volume scope and the human ears and what they hear in their headphones. It takes up much more space than it would if you were there in person, and maybe, you know, there were like 3 different people or 4 different people talking kind of around the same time, and someone saying, yeah, okay, and it takes up too much audio space. And I don't think that a lot of like esports teams and even like LCS teams understand just even that fundamental basis of the difference between I guess the volumetrics when it comes to speaking in person versus speaking in a podcast. Therefore, quote unquote, like speaking in comms within, a setting like that. And it's very different. And I just don't think people understand the human characteristics of what it is to be understood through like the human ears and how, I guess, your ears process sound. So I think we're in such an era to where there is too much information and you need to be able to process said information. And I'm not just talking about, the comms aspect. I'm talking about also game information of itself too, because it's very widespread on the internet. And I like to make the reference to like boomers and shit on the internet, because it seems like boomers, they don't understand the internet because it's this vast repository of information. And that's something that never existed in all existence of humanity, right? We had libraries, yes, but it wasn't like so in your face, right? It wasn't just so out there, and it wasn't by people that from the neighborhood or down the street or whatever, right? It's coming from like some high scholar, and you have to put in the effort to fucking read it, right? So it seems like boomers are just overwhelmed by information, and they get pulled into all these different rabbit holes and stuff. And I like to think that is kind of happening with the League of Legends scene. And I like to make this akinness to what is being a lot talked about in this current day and age, which is mindfulness, right? And we heard, fucking Weldon Green talk about this a lot, right? The famous sports psychologist, or actually, I don't even think he could technically call himself a sports psychologist. It was something weird, but he didn't have like the technicalities to actually call himself that. But it was the fact that he would preach mindfulness and mindfulness is just being present in the moment and not having any real escaping thoughts outside of the moment itself. And it sounds, from what I hear, it sounds difficult to do. Like I famously talk about this in a lot of my other videos, or a couple of my other videos, in fact. And I have difficulty, I guess, having my mind slip away and think about different things. Like, basically, I'm always present, always, right? I don't really think about anything else. It's just how my mind works, and apparently that's not normal. I don't fucking know. But whenever anyone talks about mindfulness, I'm just like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, so you're saying that you think about random shit all day? But anyways, since that is how the normal mind, I guess, apparently works, is the fact that, yes, as such, you need to try and limit the amount of knowledge that is inputted, into your brain. And so, it's like the famous saying of like, when a player's trying to think of how many different things that they need to work about their own gameplay, right? It's like, oh yeah, you're a good player. All you just need to work on is, laning phase, map awareness, CS, objective control, jungle time, like the whole litany. And I feel like that comes down to maybe part of the coaching staff's problems, and the fact that they're trying to put too much information into that player, especially if they're a newer player. They're trying to put too much into them at once. It's kind of like when you go into a job, and in the job orientation, and you're like working with, I don't know, like a cashier or something, and they're just teaching you all this different shit about the company, or maybe about the cashiering system. And you're just like, what the fuck, dude? Like, I can't remember all of this shit. Like, you need to slow down. Just kind of have me focus on a couple different things. I don't know. Like have me just chill here and like bag food or something. Like, I don't know. So I think the problem is that people need to narrow down their own goals, and especially the coaching staff needs to be able to focus in on this particular aspect. It's that, okay, you're having problems with map awareness. What I want you to do is, like, maybe even I want you to wear like an eye tracker, and I actually want to see how many times you look at the map. And then what I want you to do is I'm going to watch a lot of your games, and we're going to wear this eye tracker. And I'm going to see how many times you actually look at the map per minute. And if it's below a certain threshold, which, I find unacceptable, then we need to work on that. And I need you to like focus on this specifically, right? And that's a narrowed down goal. That's something that someone can literally focus on. It's very objective. They know exactly what they need to do. So it's a goal that's attainable, right? And there's not so much information that's muddled out from that. And then you can have them work on something else. So I feel like the entire, information landscape is very muddled, and I feel like people have just a lower attention span now. I mean, even in this fucking video, I bet like half the people tuned out right now because it's more of an in-depth conversation. Or maybe that's what I say. Maybe I'm just not as entertaining, right? But, I mean, you see that the trend is people hopping from like YouTube video to another game that they're playing on the other screen to now another YouTube video, etc. And they aren't really paying attention to exactly what's going on, and they're waiting for like the next dopamine hit or some shit like that. And so we've fallen into this trap, I guess, of trying to get too much information all at once, to where if you try and get too much information, all of it becomes meaningless because you don't focus on it. That's the same thing when I see coaches kind of get too cute with drafts, is that they end up psyching themselves out. They end up trying to look for like this new pick that, is like this off meta thing that kind of seems cool. And so they try it out with their players on stage or whatever, and it doesn't work out. It's just like, dude, like you're putting too much information on yourself as far as a coach and as far as the draft plans, but also onto your players of trying to learn like all these different aspects of team compositions and things like that. Like just sometimes focus on the basics is just enough. I mean, that's the same thing with itemization and the fact that there is now more focus on itemization. But if a player doesn't have the bandwidth in order to actually focus on something like that, or rather, maybe you actually think that they could improve on a different area way further, right? And like up their percentage as far as like their gameplay. Maybe it's map awareness that they need to focus on that is more important of, the gains that they could create rather than, focusing on their item builds, etc. Like maybe just make that sacrifice and have them focus on the map awareness and then worry about autopiloting items later and, building out a cohesive, thought-provoking idea of what you should build every game. So all in all, I think the entire problem of overwhelming amounts of information is that you just need to slow things down, right? I think the world has changed with the invention of the internet, and it is becoming kind of a skill, actually. And the fact that because we have an abundance of knowledge available at our fingertips basically constantly, right, because we have phones and shit like that, is the fact that the intelligent people are not the ones that can amass like this grand amount of information. It's actually the people that can parse out information, the people that can inhibit being given information and to kind of filter that to where they can make it into something cohesive that they can actually use. And so I think this is a very underrated skill, and I think this is something that actually isn't focused on in the pro esports scene.